Good morning. It is still morning here in California. I'm Adoria Williams, your facilitator for this wonderful presentation. We have Professor Greg Byers here today from the Los Rios College District. And he is going to talk to us today about teaching an anti-racist online history class with open pedagogy. Take it away. But before you do, I do want to let everyone know that captions are available. If you click down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can see the captions. And this is being recorded, and the recording will be available in about a week or so. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you. Welcome to Teaching an Anti-Racist Online History class with Open Pedagogy. Thank you for spending some of your valuable conference time at this session, whether you are here live or watching the recording. And as mentioned, if you are here live, please don't hesitate to post questions or comments in the chat. I will pause to engage, and I also plan for questions and answers at the end. Today, I'm going to begin my story by explaining what the OFAR project is and how my use of open educational resources allowed me to use the practice of open pedagogy to make my students collaborators in knowledge creation. I'll also describe how I use anti-racism to surface student cultural identity. And I will end with sharing some of the lessons that I have learned along the way. We will also hear from some of my students. The image on the screen is the logo for the Open for Anti-Racism project. This is a project of the Community College Consortium for Open Educational Resources. The project was created in the spring of 2020. It started with the premise that instructional faculty want our teaching to be anti-racist, and that OER and open pedagogy are tools that can facilitate that work. It invites California's community colleges to submit teams of instructional faculty to join a cohort and commits to a year-long project. I was the leader of a team for my college at Cosumnes River College in 2023-24. We had 6 instructional faculty in our team. The other members of my team were 2 biology professors, 2 English professors, a theater arts professor. So the project is open to and speaks to the diversity of our disciplines. I'm also really happy to say that 3 of us were adjunct faculty, and I'm very, very happy to be part of a organization, part of a program that supports professional development for our adjunct colleagues. The next slide, I'm going to go over more on how the project is structured. That is, by the way, the URL at the top of the page is the URL for the OFAR project. The way the project is structured, it is 1 year long. There is a course in the fall, and then in the spring, we call it the implementation semester. In the fall, we take a course where we learn what you see the topics are listed on the screen. We learn what anti-racism is, what anti-racist pedagogy is. We learn about open educational resources and open pedagogy. And by the end of the course, each of us has created an action plan that we would implement in the, using anti-racist teaching practices in a spring semester. We had regular meetings throughout the year. We received support from a coach. Coach is a peer faculty from another California community college. I'm lucky enough this year I'm serving as a coach for a team from Antelope Valley College. We attended webinars hosted by various subject matter experts. And then in the spring semester implementation also included a reflection on our experiences and research. We work with the RP group to do research on the project and its effect on student success, in particular the success of our disproportionately impacted students. So they worked with our college research offices. All of our students were surveyed, and selected folks were invited to participate in interviews. So that's part of their research project. And this culminated in a June showcase. And I see, I don't know, we can't see what you are sharing. Are you all seeing my screen share? Is that wrong?
No.
Let me stop share. Let's try that again.
Now we can. Thank you.
Now you can. Okay. Let's see. I don't think you missed anything. If you missed the other things on the prior slide, there's an even bigger version of the OFAR logo. Isn't that neat? So that's the only real image that I want to share that's been important. The things I've been saying are basically, of course, what's on the slides. So again, what we did in the spring semester as we implemented our practice in actual classes, we had regular meetings with our coach. We had regular webinars with subject matter experts. And it all culminated in a June showcase where each of the team members contributed to a video that each of the teams created that was then shared at the June showcase. I've talked about OFAR, and I'm going to talk next about a different subject. But first, I'm going to pause, see if there are any questions about the OFAR project itself. Okay. All right. So I'll move on to my next topic, which is actually how I got started with open educational resources. On the screen are some images. There's the banner for the textbook that was using at the beginning of the project, the OpenStax U.S. History book. There's the crash course logo, and a couple of presenters from the videos that I use. That's John Green on the left and Clint Smith on the right. I began using open educational resources about 15 years ago after I discovered some shady behavior by my textbook publisher. Every semester, I have students ask if they could use last year's version or the prior version of the textbook. And I said that was fine because I know history scholarship, that's my discipline. I know it doesn't change that dramatically year to year. And I hope that I would be aware of any dramatic changes of interpretation that I would be including in my textbook. So I said that was fine. But then I had some students who came to me and said, Professor Beyrer, this stuff that was on this exam, one of your exams you have wasn't covered in the textbook. And I looked, and sure enough, I saw that there was one particular piece of information, one particular block of topics that was moved from one chapter to another. And that was the only change that was made in that version of the textbook compared to to the prior version. So clearly that did not justify the new edition. And so I immediately began looking for free textbooks so at least my students would not have to pay. As a history instructor, I feel really fortunate to have a teaching career that has grown up with the World Wide Web. The web makes it very easy for me to find material for my courses. And with Creative Commons, which turns 25 this year, we have an organization that provides the licensing that supports open educational resource. OpenStax is one of the organizations that works with Creative Commons licenses. They publish textbooks in a variety of disciplines, including history. So I investigated this textbook. I liked it. I liked what I saw, and I've been using it for several years. OpenStax uses a Creative Commons attribution license, which means a lot for open pedagogy, which is I'll be talking about in my next slide. And while I'm talking about open educational resources, and again, this is for an asynchronous online history class, I was also fortunate to stumble upon the Crash Course YouTube channel. They do a video series on a variety of subjects, including history. Many are aimed at students taking advanced placement courses in high school, which means they're also aimed at lower division courses, which is what we teach at community colleges. So it worked really well to have found this. Their videos are very well made, they're well informed and well delivered. And even better for an interpretive subject like history, they currently have 3 complete series on American history. John Green, again pictured in a screenshot on the page here, he hosts a series called Crash Course American History, which is like the traditional textbook in terms of it's very broad but relatively shallow. Clint Smith, also pictured here, hosts a series called Black American History, which focuses on the experience of African Americans in American history. And their third series is one called Crash Course Native American History, hosted by Che Jim. I have not yet used that one. That was actually completed this year. So I may be introducing that into future offerings of my history courses. I feel like I'm an asynchronous online history professor heaven because one of the most important things for people to learn about history is it is interpretive. There are many stories in the past and many ways to tell those stories. That's part of what I teach students, and I'm really grateful to expose students to these different interpretations as well. So far, so good on OER. Next, I'm going to show how I use my textbook for open pedagogy. But first, any questions about open educational resources? Okay. Doria, thank you for sharing. Yeah, there are a lot available now. In California's community colleges, we are fortunate to have our state chancellor and the board of governors is supporting, and our statewide academic senate has a lot of support for open educational resources. It's great. It's really nice to have that. For me, open pedagogy includes assignment submissions that are reusable. So this could be a portfolio of work that a student makes that they might use to help them apply for a transfer or a job, depending on the discipline. For my class, I decided to have my students edit my textbook and make them co-authors of the learning material that their successors will use. The image on the screen is a screenshot of the table of contents from my textbook and Libra texts, and it lists some of the students who have contributed to our textbook. Um, the OpenStax, again, makes open pedagogy possible through two methods. Number one is their license. Again, it's Creative Commons attribution. So all anyone needs to do if they want to reuse or edit or alter their work in any way is include an attribution to the original source, and that is it's hard to read maybe on a screen because the type's so small, but it's actually at the bottom of the title page. It has a link back to the original OpenStax course. The second way that it's possible is that they provide access to their textbooks in Google Docs format. I didn't know that. I asked and they said, sure, here's a link to a folder that's got all Google Docs versions of all our stuff. That was wonderful. So the first time I did this, what I did was I created two copies of I took the Google Docs version and I had two copies of the textbook. One was I use for my students, right? This is the one they're going to be reading, that we quizzed on, they can use as a source for their other assignments. And then the other one they edited directly. I did not invite them to change the text within the textbook, but instead I asked them to suggest an additional primary source to add to the textbook. So you probably are familiar with this, right? In most of our textbooks, it's not just a wall of words. There are images, there are boxes that get pulled out for interesting things, whether it's a key term that's being defined, or in my case, in my history classes, I'm used to my textbooks having call outs with pictures or blocks of text from primary sources. And so I invited my students to suggest and to add their own primary sources to that. I mentioned the screenshot is from LibreText. So this semester, I started using that platform through my college's zero textbook cost program. And now I have a standalone assignment. Instead of having my students, in other words, edit the text directly, I now have a standalone assignment, right? What is their suggestion to add to the text? I also asked them for consent to include their names as co-authors of the textbook. And I do that in a separate Canvas message. So instead of, in other words, as part of the assignment, do I ask them, can I include your name in the textbook edit? I don't, because I don't want them to think that their answer to that question is going to influence how I grade their submission. It doesn't. And so I ask it in a separate message. I ask the question once. I say, hey, any of your edit suggestions, do you want me to include your name as an author? And again, they say yes or no. And I also tell them I assume the answer is no, because I don't want to presume that they want to be included in that list of authors. And I'll go ahead and read this. If you see the list of authors on my screenshot there, the very last entry is additional students who chose not to be named. So I want to make sure that I honor their contributions, but also respect their interest in being anonymous. And one more thing I want to say about the assignment. So one of the things that I like about the assignment, when I originally did it with Google Docs, right, I said the mechanics of the assignment where I asked them to basically insert a comment in the Google Docs where that's how they would claim a paragraph. And then in the Canvas assignment, basically they would give me a URL to that comment. And then they would say, here's my source, right? And here's the explanatory text I want accompanying the source. What I like about the way I'm doing it now by having it as a separate Canvas assignment is that the assignment says, they identify the section of the textbook they want to edit. Okay, great. I also want them to give me a complete works cited entry for the primary source. That was not something I did before. They give me the source, whether it's an image or a block of text from a primary source. They give me a couple of sentences of explanatory text. So those are the sentences, right, that appear in the textbook next to the image. And then finally, and this is something I really like that I added that I didn't add before, is I asked them to explain what value is your new source adding to this textbook? How is it helping teach something that the textbook is mentioning or something like that? My textbook's got lots of places where there aren't primary sources. There's a lot of scope for my students to add. And one benefit I had, and I remember seeing this, this is I think 2 semesters ago, was I had a student suggest adding a primary source that added a lot of depth to a topic that was barely mentioned in the textbook. There were just a couple of words in this paragraph. about a different, broader topic, and I mentioned a particular thing. And I really appreciated the student was able to and was interested that they found this primary source and they were able to say, you know what, this source adds depth to this particular topic that's mentioned in this paragraph. And I think it was really wonderful. So that's how I do open pedagogy. We'll hear from one of my students about this in a few slides. And next, I'm going to talk about something that is more explicitly anti-racist. But first, as I've done before, I want to pause if any questions about this process that I use. Okay. So next, I'm going to talk about being a bit more explicitly anti-racist. Anti-racist teaching includes interrogating the structures within which we live and learn. In American history, it's actually not that hard to find materials that explore the history of racism in this country. That has not always been true for those of us who teach American history, but it is true now. It's not that hard. And I mentioned already the Clint Smith series, Black American History, is of course very explicit on that topic on racism. As a teacher of history that tries to be anti-racist, I think that assembling the content, finding material, finding people in our past that that is representative of who those people were and also representative of who our students are is not that hard. But there's a lot more places where structural racism can exist besides the skin color of the people that we study. Those structures include whether students feel welcome and whether they can connect their lives to what they are studying. That is where history can be a challenge because it is in the past, right? We're studying the past, we're not studying today. And history is also a very traditional discipline. It's been around for a long time. History is one of those disciplines where teachers talking and students listening is kind of the way it has normally been taught. I remember when I was an undergrad, almost every history class meeting was a professor lecturing and us students taking notes in silence. So to help each of my students feel welcome, to help each of my students feel welcome, to help make the study of history relevant to them personally, I have a series of identity-focused discussions that give them a place to share who they are and connect their identity to their study of the past. And I want to shout out and mention Professor Nim George. He teaches sociology at Cosumnes River College. He worked on student cultural identity and education as part of his PhD in sociology. And he inspired me to do the work that I'm doing in my history classes. So I begin each class with an identity introduction. Again, this is an asynchronous online class. That's the image on this slide. You see the wheel there. That's the wheel of culture. The discussion asks students to select a couple of spokes from the identity wheel and share why those are important to their identity. And that helps them feel welcome in this community of scholars. So I want them to be open and upfront with who they are at the beginning of class, right? Asynchronous online introductions, this is the first week. A few weeks later, we have another identity discussion. I call it identity and learning. And in that one, students are encouraged to connect their identity, what they chose to share, right, in week one. I ask them to connect that to some experience they have had as a learner, whenever that occurred. It's not about college, not even about high school. Go all the way back to their first learning experiences. And I do that because I want their experience as students to be validated and welcome in our class. A few weeks later, students are then asked to connect their identities with how they remember important events in their lives. I call these memory markers, so that's the word that I use. Again, they're sharing part of their culture, and they are also making and sharing primary sources. The lesson is that they are, again, making primary sources just like the people that they have been studying throughout our course. This helps place themselves within an historical context and also validates that their lives are exploring. When I give them feedback on the memory marker discussion, one of my normal comments is I tell them, I like what you shared, and I think this will help historians in the future learn about this, learn about us. How do we, what are my common things? A lot of my students will share photographs of their graduation from high school, right? That's a common important event in their lives. I ask them to share events. Let's see, I explicitly say, the thing that you're sharing can be personal or it can be public. So it could be something really important that happened in their lives. Boy, I would love for a student to say, here's my first face mask that I wore during the pandemic, but I haven't had that happen yet. But I remember one student who shared something I was really touched by. They were their parents were refugees from Laos, and there was a fabric square that they shared that was connected to their culture, and it was kind of a tangible reminder of the life that they had to leave behind, and that they still kept. And I thought I was really touched by that and shared. And again, grateful to that student for sharing it with their class. So that's three of my scaffolded discussions, identity discussions. And then finally, at the end of the semester, as part of the summative course assessment, the theme project, I have my students. So in that project, what they do is they take one of our course theme questions, like the role of gender, or who gets to be an American, or what is the role of America in the world. There are several questions that they choose from. They pick one of those questions, and their assignment as a scholar is to trace the answer to that question over the time period that we covered during the semester. So that's the theme project that to me feels, it's them creating something that they could share or do whatever with. But what I do to connect it to their culture is when they share their theme project with the rest of the class, I have a gallery walk discussion at the end. When they introduce their theme project, I ask them, I want you to share why did you pick this particular theme for your project? And I want them to, and some of them do, say, well, you know what? Back in week one, I shared that gender was really important to my identity because of my experience as a woman, it's, whatever. And then they shared this connecting to when I was in, elementary school, I was told, oh, girls can't do math, whatever. And then when I was later on, there was some important event that I shared. And now I'm choosing this theme, the role of gender in American history, because of my experiences, right? And I want them, my goal is for that is I want them to feel validated in how their identities inform their choices as a scholar. And I also want them to realize that all scholars have cultural identities that inform their choices. Everyone who writes anything in history has got a culture that they're writing from, and that helps inform what they choose to write about. And what I want my students to do is I hope that they wonder, why is it that some scholars behave as if their choices are not informed by cultural identities? And I know that's a normal part of how structural racism works, that folks who are not as directly touched by how their identity is racialized um, sometimes don't realize how much their identity is racialized. Okay, I'm next going to share some lessons that I learned along the way. But as always, I want to pause and see if there are any comments or questions. All right. So, lessons learned. Image on the screen is a picture of a coffee cup behind a window with the words written on it. The words say, there's a future version of me who's proud that I was strong enough. This spring, I'm in my sixth term doing the identity discussions. I'm in my fifth term doing edit the textbook. And these are some things that have helped make this, I feel, successful, and then some lessons that I'm still learning. What's most important at the very beginning is to build a community with intent. Before my students see that identity discussion, before I ask them to choose to be vulnerable and share part of their cultural identity, which can be a vulnerable experience for students, they view the um, rules of the road, basically, right? Our community agreement, our brave space, whatever we call it, shared community agreement. It's a content page. So I'm speaking using Canvas terms here. It's a content page where students that they have to view. So this is a module setting within Canvas. They have to view this before they proceed to see the identity discussion. So it lists my expectations to be excellent to each other, lists my expectations for myself. And then I link a Padlet to that. So I encourage them to share what their expectations are. I want my students feeling like they own the space that they are in, that they are co-authors of kind of the rules of engagement within our community of scholars. Um, and then what I also do is I model sharing. So for each of those identity discussions that I mentioned, I lead. Part of the discussion description is my answers to those questions. So when I talk about cultural identity, I talk about my mixed race identity, which is really important to me growing up. And it was tremendously important for me as a learner. When I was in college as an undergrad, I learned some really powerful and uncomfortable lessons about what it means to be mixed race in a society. And then I talk about my memory markers and those kinds of things. So that's really important to me because I want my students to feel okay with sharing part of who they are when their professor is sharing part of who he is. I refine assignment instructions over time. So each semester, I discover something that could be better. I mentioned already a change I made with Edit the Textbook, where I initially had my students editing a draft Google Docs directly, but I've switched now to the Canvas assignment. One thing that's nice about the Canvas assignment is um, well, I guess I have this is in some ways it's similar for both. But one thing that I like about the current way I'm doing it is that at the end of the semester, when I'm deciding which changes to incorporate into the textbook, right? It's nice to kind of have all those in one place. Makes it a little bit easier for me to do. And here's a change that I'm anticipating for the future is if I keep doing this and my students keep adding wonderful primary sources, eventually my textbook is going to be really filled with a lot of wonderful stuff. And I'm going to have to think about whether I'm going to start having to cull and pull out some of those things because I do want to have this narrative structure of the text there. That's part of how I teach and how I learn. Although, again, having the student contributions is really wonderful. Um, and then finally, ask for feedback. So, two things that I do, actually, I'll say three things that I do. First of all, is in that identity introduction. So in the very beginning of the semester, within Canvas, right, they view the community agreements, they contribute if they want, they participate in the identity introduction after seeing my sharing, and then finally after that, I have an optional reflection assignment. So this is entirely optional; that it doesn't count towards the grades. And basically, I ask them, "How did that feel? How did it feel for you in this group of strangers?" And not, I mean, they're doubly alienated, right? Not only are they in a college classroom with a bunch of people they probably haven't met, they're also in an asynchronous online class. So we're not even spending time together in community, right? Breathing the same air, talking to each other. So I asked them, how did that feel to share some of your identity, to be vulnerable, if you chose to be vulnerable? Is there anything you want to share? And I think my students really appreciate that because I have, not every student responds to it, of course. And if I can kind of summarize my impressions of the responses I get from students, about half of the students who respond will say something like, "Oh yeah, racism is wrong," right? And I'm not, yeah, that's great that they say that. I'm not sure how much because I am the professor. I have the power of grade. How much are they trying to appease me by saying that, right? Because it's clearly how I feel. And that's fine. And then I'll have some students, though, the remainders who will reflect on that experience and say things like, I've never had this happen before. I'm really glad that I could share who I am. I've had a few students who have shared things like, you know what, I was able to talk about my socioeconomic status. I was able to talk about my religion, but I was not able to talk about gender because I have had these experiences related to my gendered identity. And so that makes me glad that they feel comfortable enough to share that with me, right? So I feel like I'm opening up a space where students, again, feel safe, right? Feel safe like they can take the risks that are necessary for learning. So that's one thing that I do. I also uh, ask my students for feedback in every class. As part of my final exam, I don't give them an exercise in regurgitation. I ask them for reflection. So they have a single essay question. Is basically, what did you learn in this class? What was a challenge? What did you enjoy? What things did you practice in this class that you will take to other parts of your life, whether that's other classes or your work? Remember, I'm teaching history. History is a GE, it's a requirement. So I can probably count on a couple of hands the number of history majors I've had the pleasure of teaching over my career. I know that as a historian, within the structure of higher education, I view one of my jobs is to convince my students that history is the best discipline to major in, which I think is true. Maybe ethnic studies is a close second. Um, because of the where this discipline in my class sits within their educational plan generally, I also want them to articulate why this class is important to them. So, right, that's part of my essay. And then I have a survey, right? It's a graded survey within Canvas, so they do get the points. They love, of course, points, so I'll answer the questions. And the survey asks them questions about, and I get asked the Likert scale type questions of all kinds of things in my class. So I've been doing that every semester. I include questions about um, the identity introductions. I include questions about the edit the textbook, and of course, I have that open response question. And so first, and I'll show you a couple of slides with quotes. I'm going to just let those quotes speak for themselves. First is from a student talking about identity discussions. And the next is a quote from a student about what it was like to be a textbook co-author. When I ask students about when I ask students for permission, right? I sent a single message to them. Um, yes, most students don't respond. That's fine. Some students, a few students say no, but most of the students who respond say yes. Some of the students who respond say yes will say things like, "Oh, wow, I'm really like I'm." They feel honored to be asked, right? They feel like they're being recognized, and and I'm glad that they feel that way, of course, because that's my intent, right? I want them to see themselves as valuable members of that community of scholars, and the best way for me to show them that value, not only by editing the text, but again, including them as authors, so that next semester, when my students look at the title page, they'll see, oh yeah, Professor Beyrer, he's the primary author, and oh, look at all these other folks, other people like me, who have chosen to help edit, help write, and be participants in this community of scholars in that special way. All right, I'm actually on my final slide. I want to say thank you again for participating here. I do want to take questions and maybe have discussion. We do have plenty of time. My name is Gregory Beyrer. I'm a member of the faculty at Cosumnes River College, which sits on the land of the Miwok and Nishinan people. We remember their continued connection to our region and give thanks to them. That is my email address, and I would love to engage in conversation.
If anyone has any questions, please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask. Thank you so much, Professor B. That was awesome.
Thank you. Yes, Priyank Shah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
First, let me say thank you for your presentation. I am sitting here just enthralled. I am a administrator at Minnesota State College University System, and in a formal life, I was a sociologist who taught, and I missed it very much. And so your lecture really, your presentation is bringing back a lot of great ideas. I have a question though. How are your colleagues, your fellow faculty members, responding to this level of intentional engagement with your students? This is not your prototypical get the textbook. I'm going to give you three multiple choice exams, a couple of standard essay response. Like, how are your faculty colleagues responding to this? And I'm curious, do you get any, for lack of a better word, flack from your colleagues?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. I actually have one of my colleagues is here in the room with me, and I would love to hear her perspective on this. But I will share from. I am an optimist by nature. I choose to feed the good tiger inside me and not the angry tiger. So I don't give any attention to people who don't appreciate this work. So I don't. One part of my answer is I don't know how much flack there is. Another part of my answer is because of the nature of my position as our distance education coordinator, my colleagues, they don't have to engage with me if they don't want to. And I don't engage with everyone. My full-time job is I teach people how to use technology, teach people how to teach technology. So they can attend a workshop. I don't have to engage with them. They'll learn how to do it, whatever. As a teacher, I teach on an overload basis, right? So my full-time job is the coordination. I get to teach one or two classes a semester as an overload. At my college, overload faculty are the lowest preferenced faculty when it comes to getting classes. And I say that literally, like in our contract, it's full timers with preference. Of course, full timers get preference. Full timers want overload. We have a couple of level of preferences for adjunct faculty, adjuncts without preference, and then literally at the bottom of the list are full timers from another department. So within my discipline, I am not. Um, because of my status as an adjunct faculty, I am not part of the department conversations and everything. What is true is I have given this presentation as part of my College Flex week. I happen to work at a college. We have really strong support from our administration for equity work. So I think that I recognize that where I am located, I've got a lot of privilege in terms of the folks who might feel differently. And of course there are, and they're entitled to their feelings. And there are some good reasons to, I mean, I shouldn't say good reasons. There are really important discussions that I think we should be having. I think in some ways, those people, those views, they're not very strong at my college, and they're not as. I mean, there are some folks who are very comfortable expressing their opinions. So I don't by any means think that they feel intimidated or they need to be silenced. But they choose not to engage in the conversations. I think is one way I would say it. Yeah. Thank you for asking that.
Are there any other questions? Well, we're finished early. Dr. Beyrer, thank you again for joining us. This was really an inspiring topic. As was said in the chat, I agree 100%. And please do come back again and present at future conferences. We'd love to have you back.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And for those of you who missed the earlier setting, and I'll speak to Priyank, your comments as well. So earlier today, my colleague Brandy Jones-Thomas and I presented on the Equity Academy, which is a commitment that our college has made to help our newly hired full-time faculty learn how to teach with equity and cultural responsiveness in mind. And not just teach, but counseling, because we have counseling faculty who are part of that group, and to be advocates for our most vulnerable students, not only within their direct student contact, but even amongst their colleagues and all that. So that's a great presentation. Brandy did most of the talking there. She's wonderful, and we're really happy with that work that we do as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And as I said before, information from all of the presentations today and tomorrow and Wednesday will be available in about a week. So you should receive a notice about that when they are available for you to view. Any final questions? Okay, we're going to wrap this up then. Thank you again for joining us today. There is not a presentation in this room after this. However, there are two others available. In room A, we have Brielle Enrique, and she is talking about designing for deep learning, equity strategies for online instruction. And then in room C, we have Erica Dallas talking about the Student Visibility Framework, an equity-centered approach to capture learning. So please go and visit one or both of those presentations, and thank you for participating in the Peralta Equity Conference.